games, and it's how he qualified for freestyle, as he said. So, and we were happy to be a part of that and hosting those events on chess.com. So either way, it's time to dive in because we can talk about Hans Niemann a lot. I see a lot of people in chat saying, hey, where's the love for Denis? We know that. Hans Niemann is a character who's larger than life in a lot of ways, and Denis is also here to say, I'm going to let my chess speak for itself, though. And here we have a Berlin. We are not forgetting that this young man has a chance to not just send Hans Niemann home, but go to London. So here we go, Levy. Yeah. We're on the board now, and we have a mainline Berlin.
You talked a lot about larger than life. This opening is hardly larger than life. I hope that we don't get a buffet of this opening, because actually Hans Niemann plays this with the black pieces as well. But Denis Lazavik is not an e4 player. Hans is an e4 player, first and foremost. Danny, you probably know the intricacies of this opening far better than me. This is a perfect weapon, I think, to start the match. Uber solid for black. You kind of see what your opponent is feeling for. Long endgame grind, or are they going to try to, hit you with some theoretical novelty? So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the nod. I did play the Berlin for a brief stint when I was trying to be a real chess player as black, but I will not pretend that I'm going to be up on the theory as much as these two guys are. But we might get a theoretical Berlin, because if we're seeing these types of moves played early with this type of speed, and these guys aren't going to blink as far as testing each other on their prep and just how far the rabbit hole goes, we might get a Berlin lesson together, Levy. But okay, overall, the dynamics here are white has a 4-on-3. So you have this majority. Black has the bishop pair sort of as compensation, if we're just quickly highlighting the story of the game. And Hans is not apologizing for using the extra pawn. This is one of the more aggressive ways for white to play. You don't have to play this knight e2 retreat and the immediate f3, h3, g4 that Hans is doing. But look at his time. That's what I'm impressed by, Levy. At this point, he's got just as much time that he started with, and he's put Denis on notice in regards to his prep.
For sure. And I don't think I ever recall seeing a Berlin so quickly transform into a 2-on-1 on the king side with a pass-protected g-pawn. This is definitely some sort of cutting-edge stuff. Normally, black is very happy to situate the king on the opposite side of the board, behind the pawns. And here, white is just looking like he's going to press forward. King is going to come. You're going to trade the rooks. You're fully investing in the g-pawn. On top of the fact that the c7 pawn for black is just hanging. Like, white can go grab it, provided he makes a couple of defensive moves first. But I'm mostly shocked by Hans's time management. He didn't think until about a move or two ago.
I agree. I think the time management has been the most impressive. But overall, despite the c7 pawn hanging, I think what you highlight is really the point. The problem for white is, one, you don't really want or need that pawn because it's doubled. Your biggest priority is holding onto this guy, but your bishop is kind of in the way of allowing the pawn to get there to reinforce the pawn. And if you move the bishop to a different square, all kinds of problems. You keep it on this diagonal, black's rook enters. If you move it off, well, now the pawn is immediately hanging as long as this rook can find some other thing to threaten. And these bishops often find themselves just hitting these squares right when it matters, whether it's trying to just simplify or get on d5 if it helps anything happening on the king side. So Hans is slowing down here, and I guess what I'm saying is I think that's by design. I think Denis has gotten out of a little bit of the worst of it, at least in terms of where Hans maybe knew the line better. Because I don't think that black is really in that much trouble here. A teeny bit of an edge according to the computer, but I think that black is okay.
But that's sort of how the Berlin goes. That's why literally not a single person watching this broadcast right now plays this opening for black, because none of us really understand it. And everybody watching and requesting GM commentators is pretending to understand this opening. I mean, it's quite clear. Like, Hans is going to invest on the extra pawn, but Denis has both his rooks out. The king is there to stop the pawn. The bishops are well positioned. I think this peters out to a draw quite quickly. And then I'm going to be very curious to see, will Hans go for the anti-Berlin? Or do you keep chipping away? That's a very common SCC strategy. Right. Keep playing into the same opening.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, what does white even do here? A3, B3, rook G1. Like, try to push forward. Nothing. You have no way through.
Well, and on the next move, if you don't stop it, I think black has a couple options. One is rook H5. The other is king G6. And if we just do some quick math, if you don't figure out how to deal with it, I don't know that white has enough defenders. Now, there are other tactics, of course, on the board. In fact, if the king hops to the wrong square, look for the knight to pop in. So that's what Hans is going for. So we still have a lot to learn. I'm curious whether Denis will keep the bishop on this diagonal or look for something more dynamic. Okay, he does. And in fact, he's inviting an obstacle bishop ending, which makes it really hard for me to think that either side is gonna win this game. But hey, before you call out the viewers, I'm sure Maxime Vacher-Lagrave is watching today, and he's played the Berlin. In fact, one of the last real theoretical Berlin battles I remember, Levy, was a matchup between Maxime Vacher-Lagrave and Hikaru Nakamura. And on that day, I think Robert was with me. It was like they had agreed ahead of time to give everybody a theoretical Berlin lesson. I think every game was a Berlin. It was like 30 games of the Berlin. It was insane. So I'm hoping we're not going to see that today.
I recall there was even classical battles. Hikaru is very happy to play the Berlin. He plays it all the time with black. And Maxime is actually very happy to enter the endgame. Like modern day, everybody's playing 4d3. And it's happening in the Italian as well. Like white plays a very early pawn to d3. This is for the more advanced folks who might be watching. And that is where the cutting edge battles are currently going on with white in e4, e5 positions. They're keeping it closed for a while. This is interesting. The fact that Denis played bishop c5, you'll notice that he hasn't traded the bishop for the knight, because even though you say opposite color bishop endgame is likely a draw, there's no need to rush it. There's no need to force. White is the one that has to prove that they have anything in this position. If white doesn't go for anything, I don't think black can go for anything either. I mean, white can play a3, rook e1, and the game will be a draw. There you go. I mean, you don't even have to protect the pawn on a2, and the game will be a draw.
I was just about to say, this is an active approach from Hans, but we're already in a world where we could get simplification very quickly. And yes, you do have to keep an eye on the a2 pawn here. I'm sure Denis is calculating whether he can just take and shake and bake and go for the pawn right now. The bishop already guards e6. Oh, no. So he goes back to d6, which now that's an interesting offer, because not only do I love trading, but followed by rook e7, this is exactly the type of ending that white wants.
So I guess what happened there is that it's what you mentioned about 10 moves ago. Hans doesn't have the ability to move his bishop and protect the pawn. Now he does. He actually has a fantastic endgame position now because he has a protected pass pawn. Denis is probably relying on the light squared bishop blockade to prevent Hans from getting any progress. But I think Hans kind of understands now the dynamics of the position have changed, and black has no counterplay, whereas white just has the idea of removing this bishop from the center of the board. Rook e3 maybe also. Rook b3 at the right moment could be dangerous. So you just have to make sure black can't infiltrate. So I think Hans has figured something out here. Maybe knight f3, bishop f3, and rook e6 could be an idea as well. Okay, he didn't go for it, but I kind of like that idea in the last move.
Yeah, I like it too. I also was wondering if he's going to go for knight e2, knight c3. He played it right as I was about to highlight it, because if you get rid of the bishop, as you said, the rook becomes open. Still within, it feels kind of holdable territory, but I really preferred the obstacle bishop ending for Denis versus this one. We'll see if Hans can make anything of it. Is the advantage big enough? If you go knight to c3, black can defend, and it's a position where white is definitely the one pushing, as you pointed out. The g pawn is the most permanent advantage that either side has, but Denis does have a little bit of an edge on the clock here.
Bishops are better than knights is sort of the traditional wisdom, but not in a position where the bishop doesn't have a single target. Like in this position, the bishop is a pretty piece, but it is a defensive piece. And the knight can move around on two color complexes, which is why he brought it back, and he's going to move it to c3 at the right moment. It's still hovering around equality, but practically speaking, it's definitely Hans in the driver's seat, unless now we have a moment. Like, what do we do here?
Well, Denis plays rook h1. Computer doesn't like it. The probably better was just to take on c4 and then try to defend the bishop. But we're going to get that endgame you talked about, knight versus bishop. You love to say bishop is better than knights when there's pawns on both sides of the board. But as you said, not when the bishop can't target anything, and not when white might be able to...
What? Why didn't he go a4?
Yeah, I was just about to say, not when white might be able to create a second pass pawn, and then he played b4 before I could finish the thought.
And I mean,
that doesn't make any sense.
That was the first thing that I thought of. Like, again, if AB5 was played, Hans on the previous move could have just moved his A pawn, and he would have had outside pass pawns on A and G, which just seems like a nightmare to defend against. I don't know what he didn't like about that move.
Yeah, I would quickly back up and show it, but I think we're about to get a time scramble, so maybe we'll stay here. But I think for anyone who can visualize just a little bit in your head, you can understand that if white played a4, you have one pass pawn and two. And when pawns are split that far apart in an endgame, it's very difficult for your opponent to defend, especially under time pressure. So okay, I guess I will. Maybe I'll just back up and just show, because That
Was it the
was
best move?
also what the computer wanted to do, was to play a4, by the way. This was definitely the best move. You and I, the lowly international masters that we are, we're not wrong about that. And for some reason, Hans does not elect this plan, and we are in a much closer to equal endgame still.
He probably liked the stability here. Hans probably foresaw a position where every pawn is on a dark square, so the bishop is kind of useless. Black also has no pawn break, and you feel like you can indefinitely maneuver. He probably felt he was pushing here, but he can't. He doesn't have a single way through. He should have went a4, and that's one of those things. That's one of those Magnus moves. You just kind of make it by hand, and you feel like it's the right move. You know that A and G is so far apart that it's going to be difficult for Black to defend. Yeah, Hans preferred stability, but Danny, this feels like a first game of the match kind of game. Like if this is game 10, you play a4, right? Because you build up the confidence.
Literally took the words out of my mouth. I was just going to say that Hans preferring stability is not that surprising because it's the first game. And I mean, it's picturesque. Every piece for white is going to be on a dark square, and it just was. So it's very easy when you're in those spots. You're shaking off the nerves. You're trying to feel like you're settling in, that you go for the safe approach. But undeniably, we all thought a4 was better, and we were all right. Will Hans... I don't think he gets himself in trouble here, even though they're both under time pressure. I think we will likely see this one in a draw. Unless, well, okay, I'm going to actually still say that maybe Hans has more chances than we realize, because the knight is such a tricky piece, especially in bullet types of scrambles. So let's not count out some sort of weird blunder just yet.
No, for sure. I mean, Denis Lazavik's winning chances here are literally zero. I'm calling it now.
Yeah.
Hans, it's not zero. I mean, it's maybe 10 to 20%. In a scramble, anything is possible. Also, Danny, big picture, I think this is the worst format for him. I mean, I think he's happy bleeding like 3 more minutes off the game clock and just getting a draw. And the less 5-1 games you have to play, the better. I think he's the better 3-1 and 1-1 player. I mean, I don't think that's a hot take.
Okay. Well, it's fascinating because our stats said that Lazavik is the better 1-1 player. But regardless of the stats or our opinions, everyone should take a peek at their ratings, by the way. We have players rated 32-41 and 32-31 coming in. If you're looking at their ratings right above their webcams here, depending on where you're watching, or if you're at chess.com/events, you can see their ratings next to their profile pictures. So I guess what I'm saying is these two guys are very, very evenly matched. This is a borderline corn flip call for a reason. Corn flip. Did I just say a corn flip call?
Yeah, corn flip. Corn flip. I don't know. You got Iowa on your mind.
Flip the corn, you never know where it's going to land. Here we do know
here it is. Here's the moment. We finally have a breakthrough, and you can just take the pawn. And draw. As long as you know your king and pawn endgames, this is a draw.
I am going to go full chess coach here. I want to show how that game could have been lost. So as the next game gets started, I'm going to call for an analysis board. I want to, if I can, I want to see if I can get the other game up, because that was actually a moment where that game could have been lost. If we want to quickly show that in these spots, often your instinct is thinking, oh, I should have a king that is just as active. But if you end up in a spot where, okay, I guess if you were trying to get aggressive with the king, you would eventually lose this endgame. You have to be ready to meet the capture with opposition, which is what Lazavik did. And the moment the king takes, you can get opposition. So those endgames can be lost by players less good than Hans Niemann and Denis Lazavik, but not today.